A high school chemistry teacher builds a product so clean it doesn't blend in, it announces itself. And the moment it starts moving, it isn't just street business anymore. It becomes a problem that pulls in the biggest drug hunting apparatus in the country. So here's the story. Walter White isn't running like a cartel. He isn't loud, he isn't flashy, he isn't even supposed to be on anyone's radar. He's the kind of guy people look through, not at. That's his camouflage. But his meth is the opposite of camouflage. It's consistent, it's unusually pure. It has a "this wasn't made by idiots" feel that keeps showing up again and again. And in that world, a signature like that does two things at the same time. It makes him powerful, and it makes him traceable. Because the real threat to Walt isn't one cop with a gut feeling. It's everything that happens once the right agency starts treating his product like a data point, not a rumor. Intelligence, one brain versus a whole institution. Walt's advantage starts in the lab. He isn't just decent at chemistry, he's elite. He can adjust on the fly, solve problems under pressure, and keep quality high in conditions where most cooks would fall apart. He understands yield, reaction control, contamination, the whole thing. He's not following a recipe, he's running a process. That's why his product stands out. But here's the catch. High purity doesn't only buy you reputation. It also creates a trail that specialists can follow. The DEA doesn't look at a bag and just say, "This is strong." They can test it, compare it, and learn what kind of method is behind it. They can connect seizures across time and location, then start sketching the shape of a supply chain without ever knowing the name of the cook. Walt's brilliance is personal. It's inside his head. Federal drug enforcement has labs, databases, analysts, experience from decades of cases, and a process designed to notice outliers. Walt can outsmart individuals. Outrunning an entire framework built around identifying patterns is a different challenge. His intelligence is real, but it also makes him louder than he thinks. Control, tight circle versus coordinated pressure. Walt tries to keep things small. That's not just paranoia, it's strategy. The fewer people involved, the fewer mistakes. Fewer mouths that can talk, less chaos. It's the reason he survives as long as he does in the first place. A compact operation can slip through the gaps when attention is scattered. But small and quiet only works while the heat is limited. Once the case escalates, this stops being a local problem and becomes a multi-agency effort. Task forces exist for exactly this kind of thing. They don't just chase one suspect, they map an ecosystem. They log contacts, track movements, build timelines, pressure weak links, and move patiently until the picture is clear enough to hit multiple locations at once. That's what Walt can't replicate. He can manage a cook site, he can manage one partner, he can manage a couple of moving parts. He can't manage a scenario where different teams are watching different nodes at the same time, comparing notes and turning maybe into probable into "we're ready." And there's a second problem with being hands-on. If you're the center of everything, there's no insulation. When pressure rises, you absorb it directly. The cover, normal life, buys time, not immunity. Walt's most underrated weapon is how ordinary he looks. Teacher, dad, suburban routine. The kind of person the public never imagines as the answer to a growing drug problem. That normal image matters because most suspicion is lazy. People expect criminals to fit a costume. When someone doesn't match the stereotype, observers talk themselves out of what they're seeing. That's why Walt lasts. But that advantage is mainly psychological. It works on friends, neighbors, coworkers, anyone who doesn't want to believe it. A serious investigation doesn't rely on what feels right. It relies on capability, access, motive, and behavior. A high-purity meth source using a more advanced route narrows the pool automatically. You're not looking for a scary guy. You're looking for someone with real chemistry knowledge, who has a reason to take huge risks, who can operate with discipline, and who is physically close enough to the distribution zone for the footprint to make sense. That list is not endless, and Walt has more exposure than he realizes. He has connections, routines, and a life full of paperwork and systems, employment records, medical trails, insurance, schedules, purchases, vehicles, and all the small normal things that create trackable consistency. His cover helps him avoid suspicion at the human level. It doesn't stop agencies from narrowing the search through logic. Evidence, clean enough versus modern forensics and chemistry profiling. Walt is careful. He wears gloves, he cleans, he destroys what he can. He treats risk like a lab hazard. That's why he avoids the obvious mistakes that get most criminals caught. But federal cases aren't built on one dramatic fingerprint moment. They're built on layers. C's product analysis can link batches. Chemical traits can connect distribution points. Precursors can be tracked. Lab equipment purchases can stand out. Waste disposal creates telltale signs. Vehicles and travel patterns can be logged. And with today's forensic tools, I wiped it down doesn't mean what it used to mean. The bigger issue is simple. Walt is cleaning based on what he expects investigators to look for. He can't erase what he doesn't know he's leaving behind. And even if he executes perfectly at one location, he's still operating in a world of cameras, records, and other people's mistakes. Evidence doesn't have to be cinematic. It can be boring and still be deadly in court. Pressure, performance versus interrogation plus parallel work. Walt can lie. Not just casually, he can perform. He can act normal when everything is collapsing. He can keep his face steady while the room gets tense. He has that cold ability to steer conversations and make people doubt their instincts. That's a serious skill. But it has limits. A trained interrogation approach isn't about one moment where someone slips. It's about preparation and endurance. Investigators don't walk in hoping to discover the truth. They walk in with a file, a timeline, and a strategy. They compare what you say against what they already know. They revisit details later to see if your version shifts. They watch where you dodge. They let silence do work. They keep you boxed in without raising their voice. And most importantly, they don't need you to confess to end you. A confession is convenient. A conviction can happen without it if the case is built properly. Also, the real threat to Walt in this area usually isn't Walt cracking. It's someone around him breaking first. The wider the operation becomes, the more weak links exist. People fold under fear, under money pressure, under prison time, under betrayal, under exhaustion. One flipped associate can fill in gaps. Walt didn't even realize were gaps. Disappearing, new identity versus nationwide detection systems. Eventually, the only play left is to vanish. Cut ties, start over, live small, avoid the digital world, stay off any normal radar. That can work for a while, especially if attention fades or agencies move on. But if someone is labeled a priority, staying invisible becomes a grind. Not because agents are superheroes, but because modern life is built on interconnected checks. Identification systems, financial monitoring, record matching, traffic stops, employment verification, medical care, housing paperwork. Even when you try to live off-grid, you still have to eat, move, and exist. Time becomes the enemy. Most long-term fugitives don't get caught because of genius detective work. They get caught because they need something human, stability, contact, comfort, routine. One compromise can be enough. What happens when you combine it all? Walter White is dangerous for a reason. High intelligence, technical skill, discipline, a believable normal life, a willingness to do what other people won't. If you drop him into the real world with those same traits, he would last longer than most criminals. But the moment the right agencies get a clean sample of his product and realize they're dealing with an outlier cook, the nature of the game changes. At that point, it stops being catch the guy. It becomes trace the method, map the movement, squeeze the network, follow the anomalies, and reduce the suspect pool until only a few plausible candidates remain. Walt's biggest strength is that he operates like an exception. That's also what puts a target on him, because exceptions are easier to notice. And once the walls start closing, it isn't about whether Walt can outsmart a person in a room. It's about whether one man can keep every part of his life perfectly sealed while multiple teams attack the problem from multiple angles, using chemistry, surveillance, financial analysis, informants, and time. That's why the story isn't really Walt versus the FBI and DEA. It's Walt versus the reality that systems don't need to be clever. They just need to keep narrowing your options until you run out of moves. And deep down, Walt knows that too. That's why he stays small as long as he can. That's why he tries to control every variable. Because the moment the full weight turns toward him, the countdown starts and it doesn't stop.